TTF from day one, and we thank them for continuing to believe in the work that we do to advance sustainability in the travel industry. And we also like to thank TIC Insurance, who has kindly agreed to be today's webinar sponsor. Next slide. So today's webinar, we will address cruises as a major leisure travel sector, as well as its role in sustainable tourism. Now, we have spent a lot of time developing a presentation that aims at providing you with insights into the cruise sector and addresses what are clearly extremely complex environmental, social, economic, and business issues. I would like to acknowledge the help of Sustainable Travel International and its president, Brian Mullis, who has assisted us with a presentation to highlight cruise companies' best practices. STR works very closely with companies like Caribbean Cruise Lines to develop sustainable destinations, and we'll address this over the next hour. This brings him to the speakers, and today we have Dr. Edward Manning, what you can call him Ted. He's the president of Tourist Inc. and is based in Ottawa, where he's calling us from. And you can read his extensive bio on our TTF, on the TTF website. Now, we also have the pleasure of having Beth Kelly Hatt. She's the president and founder of Aquila Tours. She's based in beautiful St. John, New Brunswick, and where she's calling us from today. We have to extend a special thanks to Beth for agreeing to present at a very short notice, since unfortunately Jamie Suding from Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines wasn't able to be here with us today. I will moderate the session. I'm calling from a very cloudy and hot and humid Cancun. And we hope that we'll have the two presentations will take us hopefully to 1:45, and then we will do a Q&A. Please type your questions as they come up and tell us who they're for. It makes it easier to address the question. And then I'll try to compile them as well as the speakers, and we will answer them together at the end of Beth's presentation. So then let me introduce Ted to address cruises, seas, and ports of call, sailing towards sustainability. Go ahead, Ted.
Well, good afternoon. I'm in cloudy Ottawa, but I hope to be on a cruise in the Mediterranean next week, which maybe gets me out of this kind of weather. I want to talk to you today about cruises, seas, and ports of call. Really, how do we make the cruise tourism industry sustainable and a positive contribution to tourism globally? This will be a fairly rapid presentation. We've got a lot to cover, and I hope we can come back and talk about the things that are most important to you. I'm going to go through introducing the cruise sector, the current state and growth, and then focus in on the environmental impacts and sustainable management. Really, how do we make the cruise industry as positive as possible, economically, socially, and environmentally? It's a very large industry, and it's growing rapidly, and it's focusing as well on certain specific locations. 16 million plus passengers in 2011, more expected next year. The Caribbean is the nexus for the industry, but it's also spreading widely into all parts of the world, and with other concentrations in places like the Baltic and the Mediterranean. There are 26 new state-of-the-art ships contracted and in planning, 46,000 additional berths, and a value of nearly $12 billion US. So why is cruising so popular? And I do a lot of cruising, both as a lecturer and as a port planner, but also just because I enjoy it. And all of the reasons on this slide are among the reasons I go. Good value for money, a chance to visit several different locations, often for the first time to decide if you want to go back later. You get pampered. All of the cruise lines tend to do a pretty good job with that. Fine dining, often better than you could find yourself in the port, and essentially getting away from it all. It's also wonderful for travelers who have any disabilities. My wife is actually in that lifeboat they are lifting back up from the water in St. Lucia because it was going to be too difficult for her to get her wheelchair up the stairs. The economic impact on destinations is immense. 2.2 billion direct expenditures, large-scale spending, about $100 each for every passenger in an average port of call, which is what was found in a study of Caribbean ports done a couple of years back. Essentially, the average cruise ship was leaving $227,000 of money a day in each port of call. And that is very significant, particularly for smaller ports. And when we say the cruise industry is large, this was a 7-ship day in Sint Maarten, essentially where the number of passengers who went ashore outnumbered the number of people on the island more than 2 to 1. So what we have is an industry that has immense potential as an economic engine, immense potential to bring cultures together, to take people to new places, immense potential to foster growth, but also immense potential to cause impacts that have to be managed. When we talk about the sustainable management of tourism, it means we have to have a clear understanding of how a cruise ship, the passengers, the industry affects the destinations they visit. And this involves both the cruise industry and the people who manage the destinations they visit. The objective of sustainable management of tourism is to maximize the benefits to everyone while managing, reducing, and eliminating where possible any negative effects they may have. Driving the overall sustainability agenda is a series of actions that are done by all of those in the industry. Improving the vessels, and I'll explain to you later how they are all better now than they used to be. Marine conservation, pollution control to make certain that the fragile environments that are nearby are not harmed. Management of the ports of call themselves from an economic, social, environmental perspective. Good planning to make sure that the tourists are managed properly, the shore activities are done well, and essentially more positive things are left behind than would be otherwise. And that means good stakeholder engagement and sound education. And Beth will hit some more on the education side in the next presentation. But it means the crew, the passengers, the communities, and of course the tourists themselves. When a destination starts talking tourism, they need to do an asset management, an asset assessment. They have to understand what attracts cruise custom, such as in Santorini, which is one of the more spectacular places on the planet. Once you decide you wish cruise tourism, as with any other tourism, you have to plan for the tourists. You have to make certain that you have the shoreside facilities. You have to have something for them to do, even on a rainy day. And you've got to deal with issues of seasonality and timing. When I was in Santorini, I was on the only ship, and it was wonderful. But when there are 7 ships at a time in Santorini, it's a different issue and a much harder management challenge for the people running the tourists, the shops, the communities, and the funicular that runs up and down the shore. So the kinds of questions that we urge destinations to discuss internally and with the cruise ships and with everyone involved in the industry is essentially how big do we want the industry to be? How many ships at once? How often? How long should they stay in port? Who pays what? How do you do the provisioning? And provisioning is an issue because many smaller ports have very little to sell. And of course, what can we sell them to make certain that the economic benefits remain to the greatest extent possible in the host communities? The industry is changing. The ships are now much larger than they used to be, and I'll get to that in a minute. There's a wider range of ports, places like Mindelo, Cabo Verde, or places in Mozambique or South Asia, which are brand new. And it's a real challenge for them to anticipate the range of impacts and activities they have to do, and to understand the kinds of management that have to be put in place before you have a successful cruise tour industry. Some of the challenges simply involve scale. that the ships often carry more passengers than the places they visit. And small ports like Grand Turk, Skagway, Alaska, Maldive Islands, Falklands, Bonaire, essentially have a very difficult time anticipating and handling the volumes of tourists per hour that have to come. And even with larger ports, the most interesting things may be the most fragile. The small, interesting cultural communities, the fragile ecosystems, and that's really what the tourists want to visit. So we're back into the standard visitor management issues that deal with how you handle tourists, whether they come from a cruise ship or otherwise. One of the issues with cruise tourism is that the visitors tend to have less time on shore than they would were they staying there. And that means the visitor impact can be focused in a few hours. The cruise visitor planning capacity in some of the smaller ports is very limited, and it's only now that they are starting to develop good planning capacities. And some of the smaller islands now have effective capacity, and enough that allows them to deal effectively with the cruise planners, the people in other parts of the industry, and to manage effectively the negotiation process that has to surround development of cruise tourism. When you find as well that the industry has issues of just managing when things arrive. Because most tourists like to leave on a weekend, it means that most ships will arrive at distant ports at roughly the same time. In places like Cozumel, Skagway, Alaska, you can have as many as 10 ships in port in midweek. But other days of the week, there may be very little as they are returning back to the home port. It is not easy for the cruise ships to alter those timetables simply because what the tourists seem to want is to leave on the weekend and arrive back. Although we are getting longer and more varied itineraries evolving now, and that may help ease the concentration in certain days. The question for the port is, do you build enough docking space, toilets, buses for the 10-ship day, or plan for a lower level of demand? And because cruise tourism can be very seasonal in many places, that is exacerbates the problem of just how much investment do you do in infrastructure. Do you have enough jeeps? Do you have enough buses? There are some very simple things that need to be addressed, or very basic things. Is your port big enough for the number of ships? How many people is the community prepared to host? What are the limits to acceptable change? How much infrastructure can we afford to put in place? And how can we make sure that we have the capacity to manage the tourists when they visit the fragile places? One example here is Puerto Chacabuco in Chile. And they only get one ship every couple of weeks. So they're almost at the beginning of the cruise tourism spectrum. As a consequence, there's very little in the way of port facilities. The school buses can be made available to serve the cruise, even in a few cases when the schools had to have a day off. And the level of disruption is very small. At the opposite end of the spectrum are the large urban centers like Stockholm, where they can adapt, or they can accept many ships at a time. They all dock right in the center, and it's relatively easy for them to accommodate large numbers of people. In between that are most of the world's cruise ports. Now, when we get to the environmental side, we need to look not just at the ships themselves, but rather the shore tours. Shore tours do, as I said, tend to focus on the most sensitive places and also the most interesting. We need to have an examination of the impact of land and sea tours, and simple things like waste management and providing enough water and energy to manage the tourists, to feed them, to take care of their waste. In terms of economic considerations, you need to try and anticipate the level of economic demand. Sometimes there's less than you expect, simply because The ships are there for a short period of time, and very little is purchased on shore. The industries that benefit most directly tend to be in transportation, like taxis, buses, boat rentals, in the tour operators, and in selected activities located close to the dock. In contrast, we have found that in many ports, the restaurants, the local businesses that were there before do not tend to benefit very much because people tend to bring everything they need from home, and only a very little bit is purchased if they manage to forget something. They have to buy a little more suntan oil. But the range of enterprise benefit is not all, but some do very well. And of course, there's strong competition on those docks and near them for the tourist custom. Ships are also part of the greening initiative. A cruise ship is really a floating resort hotel. And the larger new ships have incredible facilities on them: wave riders, water slides, ice rinks, bungee jumping. The ships tend to have all of the challenges that relate to greening a hotel and a resort, and also those that relate to the transportation industry. Like any large hotel, it has the same range of products and waste. And the good news is that the new ships are almost universally more efficient and environmentally sound than older ones, and also have very advanced policies in place. 20 years ago, the little ship, the Triton in Grenada, was fairly typical of the industry. Now, the new ones can be as large as the Allure of the Seas. And the interesting thing is that the larger ships are the most energy efficient per capita. In fact, the latest study I saw makes this ship, the world's largest, the most energy efficient per capita cruise ship in the world. So we're getting a lot of reduced physical impact of the ships themselves, both as a consequence of what the cruise lines are doing and of the regulatory mechanisms that are in place. They're much more fuel efficient. They have cleaner technologies, cleaner fuel types. Most have comprehensive waste management systems on board, zero waste at sea in many of them, ocean and coastal initiatives that will reduce the impacts. The cruise lines also have their own policies and practices, and we're going to go into those in just a minute. Royal Caribbean has a conservation program to support research and education and destination management, has an ocean fund for awareness and specific projects to clean up environments that they may impact. They have a Celebrity Expedition Galapagos Fund for that destination. They award an Environmental Ship of the Year to the most environmental of their cruise ships. They work with partners to protect destinations, and they are supporting the development of destination global sustainable tourism criteria. And a new initiative is sustainable shore excursions to develop and enforce standards for operators. Carnival also has a comprehensive environmental policy. From their sustainability report, they have impact mitigation and compliance. They have a social policy dealing with labor practices and human rights. They have training going on for anti-corruption policies and procedures, and of course, a comprehensive product and service responsibility code. Holland America, that's one of the Carnival brands, has an environmental management system for each ship that looks at air, land, water, and other contaminants. It has policies for operating in protected areas, has a shore excursion and guest education program, and has a philanthropy program that helps preserve the ports and destinations they visit. By the way, all of these ships tend to put a lecture on board so that the tourists can understand how these things work. And in a sense, it creates accountability because the tourists themselves are watching and asking whether or not the cruise ship is living up to what it says it's going to do. Norwegian has introduced EcoSmart Cruising, looks at environmental protection as one of the core values of the firm, and has a range of operational processes in place really to reduce the footprint of the ships. Now, these are major new initiatives, or in almost all cases, but all are now reporting on results. And if you want to look at their websites, they do have annual reporting on the results of these environmental policies. The best destination for dealing with the cruise ships, or shall we say the strongest, is Alaska, because it has many different ports. And it has developed a process which will try to limit the negative effects of cruise tourism on that region. It has a negotiation program where it sits down with the cruise ships who wish to go there and work out the best way to reduce any negative impacts they might have, to hold them to the general U.S. standards, and also to have stronger gray water standards and strong regulations for visible air emissions. And the passengers pay for it. Now, what is really interesting is they started the innovation of plug-in to shore power. And as a result, the ships don't have the engines running when they're in port. They're plugged in to town power. And this works great in a place like Alaska where they're using mainly renewable energy. It's probably going to be less of a solution in places where they have to import all of the fuel to a small island, say in the Caribbean, to produce the power. Seattle has a comprehensive port plan that's aimed at sustainable development for the whole port and focuses on reducing the carbon footprint of all ships. It also has some plug-ins. And Vancouver has a green policy and has also put shore power in its main terminal, that's the big one in the middle, which complements the Alaska initiative. And generally they're the same ships that are going up and down the British Columbia-Alaska coast. Some other new initiatives are ports which are themselves taking on a specific process. What we're finding is that Geiranger Cruise Port in Norway has an environmental monitoring and investment situation. And what it is trying to do is put a comprehensive program for reducing overall negative environmental impacts within the port. In Dubai, the new cruise port is built to lead silver certification standards, making it a very energy and energy efficient building. And other ports are starting to put out environmental policies. The most recent ones online are from Melbourne and Cork. Now, I want to talk a little bit about impacts on the town center and the port. Basically, because so many tourists come ashore just in one spot, the greatest impact, the greatest density of tourism can occur right in the center of town. And there needs to be coordinated planning between the cruise lines and the destination to make certain that these are well managed and that they benefit both the tourists and the residents of the port. I want to talk as well a little bit about tours before we hit the end. Because most visits to ports are for 12 hours or less, and most passengers leave the ship at least once, and most cruise ships put as many people as they are able on tours, we have a very concentrated period when a lot of touring has to take place. Sometimes they are not very well managed. I was on this one that I show you in Lamanai, where essentially you had to race from the ship to ashore to a tour that took up all of the time that you were ashore. The issues here, and by the way, it was an excellent tour, really well done. The local people actually benefited because they were providing lunch. But the problem was that the boats had to go too quickly down the river, and the last tenders back to the ship would go almost at the same time as the buses arrived back. Therefore, the need for better coordination between the cruise ships and the tour operators to try and relax this so that there are the same net positive benefits received, but a better management of the potential negative effects that could occur if this is done frequently. Visitor management is very important, and same as with regular, normal tourists who are not from the ships. It's very much like day tourism, but things tend to be concentrated at the same time. There is a real need for good planning and particularly strong guides and good education for all of those people who are involved in the tour process. And Beth will, in fact, be going into this in greater detail. One of the considerations when you are getting cruise ships in is that the tours will focus on an area within 2 hours travel from the ship. As a matter of fact, some cruise ports are chosen simply because there are so many varied and interesting things that would provide excellent tours within 1 or 2 hours of the port. What it tends to mean, though, is that if everybody has to leave the ship at roughly the same time, they may all arrive at the same site at the same time. And there's serious logistic concerns regarding how you can stage this, how you can make certain that the tours go in different directions or different sequences so that everyone doesn't arrive at exactly the same time, needing the restaurants, needing the viewpoints, needing the toilets all at the same time. I'm going to leave some of this again for Beth because I know she's got something specifically on it. The biggest problem for some destinations is that they have not sat down and thought about how they're going to manage the kind of tourism they're going to get. And yet there are some superb examples. For example, in Ushuaia, where most of the tours head for Antarctica, they adhere to a very strong Antarctic code. It means very few people can target the same sites. The type of tourist they tend to attract is linked to the kind of experience they're going to present. And they always have superb guides and educators on board. Other cruise lines that are selling different kinds of experiences may not have the same degree of influence over the behavior of their tourists. Now, there are a large range of ways of managing tourists, and I'm going to just go through them quickly now. On my own website, there are a number of other studies and things that show the range of visitor management processes. I mean, demand management can be done simply by pricing it so that nobody goes there, or very few do. Some of the tours that go in South America to Machu Picchu or from Punta Arenas to into the mountains are very expensive, and therefore very small numbers take those. So that is one means of managing the impact, but not necessarily one that's attractive to your cruise visitors. Zoning works. This is in Tenerife, where essentially they only allow tourists in certain parts of the park in El Teide National Park, keeping them concentrated where the buses actually let them off, and therefore de facto providing protection to the areas that they might otherwise harm if they went there without controls. Facilities management is key to many areas where you are trying to manage the crowds. The best I've seen is Alhambra, Granada, simply because they have a fixed number that they understand they can manage effectively going through the Alhambra, and you show up and they have you scheduled specifically. They let them in groups every 20 minutes. If you come early in the morning, you can get a ticket. The cruise lines have some of them lined up already, so when their buses arrive, the people get in fairly directly. But what it does is means everybody has a good time and they don't all tread on each other. And they tend to be able to manage the impacts even though fairly high volumes are put through. Sometimes just managing behavior, and we'll get back to that when Beth talks to you about training guides and training tour managers. Because if you have effective guides, you can make certain that the people do what you expect them to do, and you do not have to try and deal with unanticipated negative impacts or harm to the things that people are visiting. And effective signage is very important too. This is about the most effective sign I've seen, because nobody hangs their hands or feet over the side of the boat when you're near Victoria Falls. Other signs tend to be far less effective. And waste is always an issue. Tourists tend to complain more about waste when they get back to the ship. And remember, the cruise lines are all monitoring what people thought of each port. And if they start getting a lot of complaints saying, well, it was dirty, it was unpleasant, people weren't pleasant towards us, they're likely to start choosing different sites. So cleanup is essential, and that's for the destinations to manage, but they can get a lot of help from many of the cruise lines, and also in how the tours are aimed, managed, and whether the facilities are in place. Cultural impacts are another issue, and this we're going over very briefly, but the problem is that so many of the tourists don't necessarily know what is expected of them when they're in other cultures. They don't know what will offend, and therefore we come back to needing well-planned tours, needing people who are sensitive and who can in fact instruct them. And in fact, many of the cruise lines now have sessions prior to people landing, which will give them an idea of what they are and are not expected to do. I remember seeing a young lady in a bikini try and fight her way into a mosque in Turkey. We don't want that kind of thing happening. And it does tend to create cultural situations which will be difficult for both the locals and for the next cruise through. Now, I'm going to end with a few emerging success stories. I think I'm just about on time, Jacqueline. I want to mention a few that are worth looking at simply because there are some new initiatives out. The one, Marti, focused on the Mesoamerican reefs, is trying to get a whole case focused on destination-level sustainability. What they have is a new diagnostic where they can go in and essentially identify risk and identify the things both with the cruise industry and other users of the site to make certain that the key values are not harmed. The Florida Caribbean Cruise Association has comprehensive training initiatives that go through many of the cruise lines and involve the local community and environmental projects. And there's also new standards being developed for destination stewardship and new assessment tools which can be used by destinations, by cruise managers, really to measure their own success and to understand where they do have risks they have to deal with. So I'm going to end now with a few recommendations that derive from these kinds of issues. As I say, there are a lot of issues out there that have to be managed, and it's a joint process of making sure the management involves everyone. We have to have a participatory process that involves all stakeholders to consider the cruise tourism development or expansion. For new destinations or for existing ones, they need to understand where their strengths and weaknesses are and understand which are their key assets and make sure that they're still in good shape so that the next cruise through will have the same kind of pleasant experience. Destinations need to understand better what the cruise lines really need in terms of facilities, offshore, onshore facilities. What are their constraints? I mean, sometimes they just can't get there in time or can't leave late enough to let people enjoy the evening's entertainment. And in fact, some cruise lines have actually changed their itineraries in order to accommodate the requests from people that they wanted to stay late. A case in point is Acapulco with the cliff divers, and where some cruise lines now stay late, but that means that the next port they get to has got to be closer. And some ports have lost and other ones have been added. Always develop a plan with clear goals. You know, the term that is used broadly in tourism, not just cruise tourism, is what are the limits to acceptable change? And what leverage can the destination bring in dealing with the cruise lines to make sure these limits are respected? We recommend that everyone should do an objective analysis of the prospective impacts, a strategic impact assessment, and also understand in advance who is coming and what are they going to do. I always ask people, what are you going to do on a rainy day? Move towards a joint visitor management plan with the local authorities, and ideally involve the cruise companies right from the outset. And final recommendations are to make sure that there are site and visitor management plans in place for the targeted sites where the visitors will concentrate. And that means looking at social, economic, and environmental elements. Objectively examine where the benefits are. One or two sites have actually said we don't want cruise tourism. Others have been quite successful in negotiating changes where they come ashore at different places or in smaller numbers, or where the cruise line has actually been an investor in the infrastructure and in the programs that will allow its visitors and your visitors to be very happy. So all in all, the objective is to work together from the start to make sure everybody gets the cruise tourism that they want. So thank you for listening to me. Happy to answer questions later. We simply say we're sailing towards sustainability. It's an ongoing challenge. And as the industry evolves, the challenges will too. So thanks for listening, and over to you, Jacqueline.
Yes, Ted, thank you very much, and for the really comprehensive presentation. And you can see that the growth and the success of the cruise sector presents really an amazing opportunity for tourism. And the foundations are set, I think, for getting collaboration among all the stakeholders. It's nobody said it's going to be easy, and we know that it is a work in progress. And we are, encouraged by the initiatives that the cruise ships are taking, and people like Beth, and which then that's a good segue to introducing you. You're there, Beth?
Hello. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Well, welcome. And you might not have heard in my introduction, because I understand you just come on, that there was a special thanks to you for coming through really last minute. And we want to, thank you very much for taking the time. You were away last week training, and you came in and, put this presentation together, and here you are. So thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Well, thanks, Jacqueline. Yes, I was last minute, but I didn't expect to be quite this last minute coming in late on the presentation. I had it down for tomorrow in my BlackBerry. I don't know how I managed to do that, but anyway, I'm here. And I'm really happy and honored to be taking part with Ted on presenting about cruises and seas and ports of call especially. As you mentioned, we do cruise training. We've been doing it for 5-6 years now. Just to let your listeners, let you all know, it's a little bit different when you're speaking and not seeing the people you're speaking to. So when we've been in the industry now since '82, we're celebrating our 30th year this year at Aquila. And we launched Aquila's Center for Cruise Excellence in 2007. Aquila's business today is 2 compartments, shore excursions, and we are taking each season, and our season is short, unlike the Caribbean. It's from June to October, and we take about 75,000 passengers on tour. So as Ted mentioned, the logistics can get really difficult. And we were the establishment of the Cruise Center for Excellence, just to give a little bit of explanation, it was at the encouragement of the cruise lines. And we're offering now, we've done some port readiness programs, we have an online international tour guide certification program that's worldwide, and we now have a tour operator designation. Those are endorsed by the FCCA, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those. We've partnered with both FCCA and with Sustainable Travel International, because it's really important to us to bring some sustainability and some organization to our industry. I'm pretty passionate about having things to raise the bar to help in other areas, and we're trying to bring a base level of standard to the industry. So I'm going to give you a bit of a training overview of what we've trained on. I'm going to talk about the certification for tour guides and the designation for operators, and some of the responsible tourism and service excellence practices that we're trying to impart. I think that Ted did cover some of the growth of the cruise industry, so I just want to mention again how important this is for many of us in the industry in Canada and around the world. This year, it had been an annual growth rate for the last 20 years at 7.2%, but this year it actually is 10% in 2011. For 2011, they've actually had we have now 20 million worldwide cruisers. So it's an important demographic, and it's one that is continuing to grow. And I think we covered the economic impact already. So besides workshops on the shore, excellence on shore, and some port readiness, we've given some port readiness workshops in Atlantic Canada, especially to most of the small ports that were emerging and trying to get into the industry, just to help them with what to expect from it, what cruise lines expect from the ports, and how to work together with what their strengths and weaknesses are and their opportunities. Just for those of you, because I've mentioned the FCCA, it's the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association. It's a member board of the 14 cruise lines that operate more than 100 vessels, and they're working with governments, ports, and private sector just to manage some of the lines to enhance the destination experience, and that's part of the reason why they've come to us with trying to work with them on some of the training that's available in the industry. The value of this training, cruise lines have an increasingly high level of expectations from their shoreside experiences, and so do the cruise passengers. So if a destination's shore excursions and tour operators, if we don't measure up to these high standards, the cruise lines may choose to go elsewhere because they have a lot of little ports all around to choose from. And there's many new ports coming on board, eagerly wanting the cruise business. So it is something that the training and the service experience that we give is really important. And for the guides and the tour operators especially, the value of training is all of these things that you see in yellow. It's everything from happier guests that everyone on that pyramid get, to better experiences and better evaluations. The tour operator gets enhanced product and more sales, better guides. But also the port and the region have it helps with their reputation if there's good training happening. They have an enhanced port experience, the word of mouth, people are going to spread the word a bit more. And it also, the training helps to handle emergencies, minimize complaints, and it's an extension of the onboard experience, because in the end, that's what the cruise line is looking for. They know what service they give on board, and they're looking to enhance and make the shoreside experience just an extension of what they get on board. And part of all of this is a responsible growth of cruise. For ports and destination, it can't be just about infrastructure. It has to be about the people, the attractions, the approach, the strategic approach to destination stewardship. It has to be about developing sustainable, responsible practices, and guides can help with that. They're sometimes the only person that a guest will see or meet on a tour because as Ted mentioned earlier about some of those longer tours, they may be the only person that they meet that are locals. So it's really important that they impart some responsible tourism practices from talking about the local culture and what is acceptable, what isn't. Things like issues with with garbage and throwing things or touching plants, and so it's all things that we try to teach as a training organization to make the experience that the guests have not just a really good experience, but also one that is going to reduce the impact on our destinations. So just to tell you a little bit about the first thing that we launched 2 years ago now, we developed a program, an online program for tour guides. The tour guide in a destination is sometimes, as I said, the only person that they will meet. So the tour guide is extremely important. What we were looking for at Aquila Center for Cruise Excellence was to find a way that we could get training out there to the masses, especially in the Caribbean and places where they may not have schools or other means of education for tour guides. We wanted something that was effective, affordable, and sustainable. We wanted something that we needed an option we knew that tour operators and tour guides could afford, even if they were in remote areas, because many times bringing us in, which is how we started with the training on tour guides, became really expensive for some of the destinations. We hired a firm, that Skillsoft, an international firm that has done online programs with Dell and Microsoft and some universities, so that we had a really high-level, world-class program to do this in. And today, we have guides in our program from Panama, Mexico, Saint Martin, South Polynesia, UK, Europe, Greenland, just Jamaica, to name a few, and Dominican Republic is coming on board. There's just many everywhere, and it's really exciting to see and hear their comments. About 30 tour guides in Panama have received their full certification now, and that's really, really exciting. And when you're in a port when you're a guest in a port and going on a tour, you seldom remember all the details of a tour, but you'll always remember a tour guide, especially a good one, and you'll remember them by name. They're essential to the guest experience and ultimately responsible for the success of any tour. So how did we find a way to help guides deliver a wow experience? The Tour Guide Excellence is a program that provides international certification. Guides are registered online with a passcode, and they can go in on their own time and take each lesson individually. Each lesson, there's 6 lessons and a final assessment, 2 final assessments really. Each lesson will take anywhere from an hour to 5 hours, depending on the guide, their language skills. They're all in English, because one of the things that the cruise lines asked us at the beginning is because today the majority of passengers are English, and where they have the most challenges is having guides that say they can speak the language and deliver the tour, but they're really not as, their language skills in English aren't as strong. So we do provide a transcript that they can read at the same time as the narrator, so that they can follow each lesson. And at the end of each, they get a final, so each lesson has anywhere from 5 to 7 topics. on all of these topics, from an overview of what cruise is about, to hospitality and service, to research and field skills, because they have to be able to find that history and all of the things that they're imparting to the passengers, but also presentation and storytelling, because sometimes you can be a historian or an archaeologist, but you may not have the skills to weave that into a story, so we help with that. Preparation and processes is about preparing for the tour. Difficult situations and risk management, losing a passenger. It can be small things, losing a camera, or it can be an accident, or just helping to minimize risk, because that helps all of us in the end. The final assessment, there's an exam that takes the guide through a full day in the life of a tour guide, so that they can answer get everything that they've learned. But also we do a video exam where they have to upload a video to us about certain aspects that you can't measure online. And tour guide Maria, who's this person here, brings it alive. She will give examples at the end of each topic about what certain things mean to her. So she'll relate the information back to the tour guide in a way that's more personal and clearly showing them why what has just been taught is important to them. We've had testimonials on our site, and we're getting some on Facebook all the time. One that I'll just read to you is, I would say that I learned much more than I had known. Sometimes what we do looks simple, but doing this course made me realize that my responsibility is a much bigger task than I thought it was. So this is really what we're really trying to impart, and that's been really important to us. The next one is a tour operator designation that we have we're just finalizing development on. And this is for the tour operators that work in the industry, because if their guides are certified and doing the right thing, you also want the operators to have a base level of learning. And we're going to offer this one as a one-on-one, similar to an ISO, where it's all about processes and procedures and the tools that they need. Because one of the things that the cruise lines have told us, and why they came to us originally with the tour guide and the tour operator training, is that we have found a way through itemized processes that we have to have a consistent product that offers value. And we believe that it's in those processes and everyone knowing what to do next that really helps your business to deliver service excellence. Many operators have great operations, and we just need the base standards, and this is what we're providing here. This is exclusive to the FCCA at the moment for their tour operator members who have contracts who are already working with the cruise lines. And we do provide also other tour operator training in between this. We've also been doing some workshops through the FCCA on shore excellence, and that's where I was last week in Guatemala and in Aruba, working with the general industry and some operators there in just offering what is the best thing to do when a cruise ship arrives. So just to share a little bit with you on some of what we showcase and what we try to coach with operators on their shore excursions. What's important to the destination is that their excursions showcase the best of the destination, that it contributes to their marketing efforts with the cruise lines. It is destination marketing worth millions that we sometimes don't think about when you see all of the cruise lines and all the marketing that they do for a port. It really helps even for the return visits that we sometimes forget about. The economic impact on the local tourism operators is really important. How good a shore excursion is can impact future calls on the port. And the return visits, most destinations, most ports will have a a 7 to 25% return visit, which means here in Atlantic Canada, we're looking at the 7 to 10%, but that just means that guests come and experience the destination before they may go back for a week or more online. So that's really an important thing, an important impact that the cruise line can leave. What we try to do with the experience for independent guests, what the cruise lines and the guests are looking for is they're looking for activities for guests that aren't on tour. They want shopping in close proximity to the pier, facilities for crew members, because sometimes we forget about them, and they're usually a third of the ship, a third over and above the passengers, and providing things like maps and taxis, shuttles, visitor information. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of what we touch on, some of what we teach in responsible tourism and service excellence. And we really are trying to help ports, destinations, the tour operators to establish a strategy for sustainable and responsible tourism practices. And there's sometimes a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities to make this happen. We need to work together. I think Ted mentioned that at the end, one of his recommendations, and that's extremely important to measure the quality, the impact. Yes, if there's 5 ships in port, you can't have the same impact. You can't everything that we do it in logistics with the cruise lines so that the tours are sent off at different times so that there's not as much of a herding, so that people feel like they're really experiencing the best of the destination. We try to make the site visits, guides go different ways, different routes, so that they don't all end up at the same place at the same time. And those are all things that we believe can be taught and that people can work with it so that they become better at managing the impact on a destination. And working together with all the suppliers and everyone concerned is really how this challenge can be because we all have many parks where you can't have everybody at the same place at the same time. The other challenges that face destinations is you do need products that fit each line. I think Ted was mentioning that each line is quite different and are looking for different things. None of them want to be, all in a group, all together, all in the same place. So we need to ensure that there's consistent standards, and the guides often in destinations, the guides are unregulated, so training the guides is a first step, and it makes it, if they understand their responsibility, that really helps. Evaluating skills. Sometimes there have been guides that have been working in the industry for 10, 15 years, but no one's ever gone on their tour to evaluate or even know. Sometimes you just think because someone's been at it for a long time that they're good. The knowledge and the excellence practices, what practices and what do they tell our guests? And in the end, it is working together to maximize the limited a lot of that is, none of the lines want, 10 kayak tours in one port. They want all things that are different. They also don't want on each port on the itinerary to have the same tour as well. So that's helpful as well, to know what else is offered on the itinerary so you can offer proper product. We try to do a lot with the tour operators with product development so that they can have a bit of a standard on how to best choose suppliers and to understand the needs for all the things that you would need on a tour if you're making a stop somewhere, the needs for, things like washrooms and how many seats they have, and the things that sometimes you wouldn't think to make sure you count. Stairs, handy, accessibility. Creating a unified voice within the industry is important. I think the whole industry is a wonderful industry. And the follow-up to ensure return visits, to make sure that the additional impact, the economic impact is good, but also the impact on the environment and the social impact with all, the guests enjoying and making sure that we all make a difference. So we're really excited at this first step, and we hope that many of you will join us in celebrating this addition to the industry. We do share Sustainable Travel International's mission, which is responsible tourism or travel means helping to make a difference in leaving the world a better place. And I'd appreciate any feedback that you may have that could help us to continue to share these excellence practices, and certainly help us to promote the idea of standards in our industry. And thank you for joining me, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Beth. It's really wonderful work that you do. This is truly a living example of the many efforts and the initiatives that are underway to build sustainable tourism practices, and whether it's it's a really grassroots level where a good guide helps to connect the visitor emotionally to a destination, and also the high impact with operators in terms of best practices. So thank you very much for that. We have we're running a little bit over time. We have a couple of questions, and maybe what I'll do is there's one that maybe we'll split them up. What are some of the the solutions? Raquel has one there about managing cruise visitors, and suggesting perhaps some of the challenges of spending more time in each port, and whether that is possible, and what other operational challenges. So perhaps Ted, you may be able to answer that.
Yeah, the cruise I take next week out of Venice spends 2 days in Venice and 2 in Istanbul. And this is a growing trend. And in fact, talking to the cruise line people, they say there has been more demand. Now, it's not necessarily the first-time cruiser who will do that. Many of them are collectors, and if it's 10 nights, they want 10 ports. But those people who are on their second, third, or 50th cruise often want longer to explore things that are a little farther from the port, to go out in the evening to cultural things that are only open in the evening, and so on. I think that it is an emerging market. It's not very widespread yet, although some of the smaller ship lines, like Seabourn or Oceanic, are starting to offer longer stays, even at small ports. So my response is yes, it is likely to work because there appears to be a market for it, and that will take the pressure off the people a little bit on the port, giving them a lot more flexibility. So they don't just have to go to the nearest waterfall, they can go to the better one that's 50 miles away. and so on. So I think it will feed being more sustainable as long as the market continues to support it.
Right. Yeah. And I guess it really depends on each one of the destinations, the infrastructure that is in place,
Sure.
and ideally, if it's a combination of both, whether you can have some destinations.
Raquel's other question is very complementary as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
Say
Yeah.
that the smaller cruise ships are more sustainable. And in some ways they are, not in terms of necessarily of energy efficiency, but simply because, quite frankly, they take less management to make them sustainable. So they can get away, you're not managing 6,000 people coming off the ship, you're managing 600. And therefore the degree of control and personalization of the experience and the pressures that you have to manage can be less. So many of the well-managed small ships, I'm thinking like the old Lindblad tours or some of the National Geographic stuff, are probably from almost every respect except fuel efficiency going to satisfy the most sustainability criteria.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that. Do you have something to add on the if the size of the cruise ship is relevant to sustainability? Although we know that it is because of the scale, but in shore practices.
Well, the point is there are many different criteria that can be applied to sustainability.
Right.
And different ships will satisfy different ones better. I mentioned that the largest ship in the world is the most energy efficient per passenger mile.
Mhm.
And therefore that is one measure of sustainability. It also can have far superior facilities on board to handle wastes and things of that sort. On the other hand, in terms of the other question is the smaller ships will often go to smaller, more fragile destinations, and therefore the challenges are different.
Mhm.
And therefore the way in which they're managed will be quite different than, say, a large ship that habitually calls at the same port and can work with the port to develop the infrastructure. Whereas a small ship that may be the first ship visiting a small South Pacific island or the first ship to go up a particular river has totally different challenges. So it's
Yeah,
not
that's a
easy
good point. Yeah.
not easy to generalize. And remember that in the development, in the GSTC development of criteria for what sustainability means, there are some 40 or 50 different criteria. And I suspect that each ship will behave differently with respect to each one of the criteria.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I mean, the key is really that we can't generalize or and simplify about something being good or bad.
A
We
very
have to.
well-managed ship will probably manage all of its impacts effectively.
Right. The other one from Magda is it's quite specific. I'm not sure if either of you are aware of the Puerto Plata being selected as a cruise port for Carnival cruises. So I'm not sure if anybody knows, and if you don't, Beth or Ted, then we'll I don't know, try to look for the answer for you, Magda, or not exactly. I personally don't know, but Ted, are you aware, or do you have an opinion?
I believe they're building a brand new port, but that's I just told you all I know about that. Except that I would make the point that the brand new ports that have been built at the North Shore of Jamaica and at Costa Maya have been reasonably successful.
Yeah.
They also built another one in Roatan. A Carnival has been on, so I think it's similar to that. And they're usually very successful because they build something that they know the passengers will want right there at the ship, like a private island. But then they have tours to the destination as well that's offered on top of that. So in those ports, probably more people will stay on land close to the ship, and it probably if it's a large ship like 3,500 passengers that some of the Carnivals have, they probably would have less impact on anything further than that because there wouldn't be as many people on tours.
So these are. So I was going to say they're purpose-built areas, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, and therefore you can manage them.
There's one in Grand Turk as well that is managed like a very nice day resort.
Yeah.
and people just walk off the ships. That's also it's also Carnival, broader Carnival Corporation,
Mhm.
and most, I'd say, a majority of the people do not leave the compound.
Right.
That's right.
Okay.
And I
Um,
think Chris's question about the approximate number of excursions versus independents, that does depend on which line. We get some that it's 85% that go on tours, but we get the majority of the lines like Carnival, Royal Caribbean, Princess. It's usually somewhere between 50 and 60%. It can go up a little bit higher, and it can be down depending on many different factors. But I would say the majority is between 50 and 60. We had Disney visiting for us this year 9 times for the first time, and theirs was more like 80%. So everyone is different.
wow.
It's also
Interesting.
very
Yeah.
port specific, because if the prime attraction is right across the street from the port, you're going to get an awful lot more people being independent. I'm thinking, say, Rhodes in the Mediterranean. Most people just wander right into the castle that's across the street, which is one of the largest castles in the Mediterranean, and spend the day there. So they're
Right.
much less successful at selling cruises than they are in, say, a port like Cataclon where the port has nothing, and virtually everybody heads inland 30 miles to see the old Olympic sites.
Hmm.
So it's
Wow.
going to
Yeah.
be very dependent on what's right in the port, as opposed to what's a ways away that needs a tour.
So which brings us back to well, we always come back to the same point of the fact that each case is very different, and we can't
Well, I think you have to treat them that way, and that's why we've both been talking about you must have competent people on the ground talking about these things, working with the cruise lines, working with the communities to get a plan that suits you. You can't get anything out of a box.
No,
Exactly.
that's right.
Yeah, it's a custom made, and that's why the stakeholder process is so important, because we can go with some framework, but then obviously we have to have the flexibility to adjust it. And there's I had a quick question. We're running a bit over, so we'll make my question the last one. But for you, Beth, I just wanted to one point of clarification: if destinations have already a certification for certain sites, right? How is the training? Is the training different for, let's say, tour guides, or you train only new guides, or how does that work?
No, we actually will train guides. It's not just for new guides. Now, there are destinations that have national certifications in their own countries, and so some of them decide that yes, we want this over and above that, because they're often the certifications in countries is a lot more about the history and making sure that the guides are giving the right information about the destination, whereas
Right.
ours is about the job itself and knowing how to do it properly. We don't
Okay.
do anything with history. We show them how to find it, where to go, where are some of the places to go, but if they don't get the history from their destination, but it's a bit different. And some national certifications actually cover quite well, so we'll work with them when that happens, if there's just some additional things that they want.
Okay, yeah, that's okay. Thanks for that. Yeah, I just wanted to see, but it was complementary essentially, right? You're looking at ways in which you can provide some capacity, and as you described, plus leveraging the knowledge that the people have because they're local, right? So that's great. Okay, thank you very much, both of you, for your presentations. Ted, have a good cruise next week, and
Get some more examples, bring back.
yeah, exactly. They'll be on your website. So enjoy yourself. So again, thank everyone for your attention. So we have another 4 webinars left. Please register for the other ones if you haven't done so. But please tell your colleagues as well. And don't forget that you can download this under archives. We're looking for nominations for the 2012 RTTF Awards, so please recommend your friends, submit yourself, or nominate someone. And you can see on the website for more details. And again, a big thanks to our sponsors, Air Canada, Delta, Ted Rogers School of Management, Ryerson University, and of course our current sponsor for today, TIC Travel Insurance.